sacred work. It is work that we do for God throughout God's church. And all of our leadership positions, all of those who help in the administration of the church here at Northview, work for God in ways that are biblically based in their origin. So this morning, I'm going to talk about the different committees and the different work areas and the biblical origins behind the work that each of them does. What I'll do is I'll talk about the committees for a minute, and then I will invite the members of the committee to stand and be recognized. And I will do this for each committee and work group area. When I've completed all of these, then I'll say a final word about all of them, and then I will invite you to share your appreciation for them. First, we have the trustees and the property committee. In the Old Testament, we read about Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a prophet who returned to Jerusalem after the end of the exile. When Israel and Judah had been conquered by the Assyrians, they did what other empires would do. They divided up the people they conquered and sent them out to different areas of the empire. Finally, a leader came about who was moved with compassion and also saw the unsustainability of this. And he decreed that all the people could return back to their homeland. So several generations later, people who had never lived in Jerusalem returned to that area. And the prophet Nehemiah saw the temple that was there, but saw what great disrepair it had been in. The Assyrians had not cared for God's temple the way the people had in the days of Solomon. So he organized men to go around the temple in the courtyard area and to measure it and to take records of the space and what was there and wasn't there. And then he organized masons and carpenters and other laborers to do the work of renovating God's temple so it could be restored to the splendor of its days of former glory. In our church, we have the trustees, who are called that because we entrust them with our property and our resources. And we have the property committee that is just under them as well. It is their responsibility to take care of our property, to make sure the lights are on, that the heating and the air conditioning are approached, that nothing gives out water or leaks that shouldn't, and to look over this property from stem to stern. Today we recognize the trustees and property committee. If you'll please stand. Thank you all. If you'll hold your applause to the end, then we'll give it. In Luke chapter 8, verses 1 to 3, we learn about a group of women who traveled with Jesus. Women who had been cured of many ailments and supported Jesus and the other disciples out of their resources. Some scholars speculate that there might have been some widows who had inheritances within this group. But they are the ones who financed Jesus' ministry so they could get food and clothes. That's how Jesus and the disciples were supported. In the book of Acts, we read how all of the disciples came together in chapter 4 and pooled their resources so that everybody in the church could be equally cared for, so that poor widows or orphans or people who are physically not able to support themselves could be supported by this communal pool. And in Paul's letters, you find how he collected offerings at all of the churches he went to send back to the mother church in Jerusalem. Paul very much wanted to visit the city of Rome, and likely he never made it there. But if you were to think of a map of the Mediterranean and everything east of Italy over to Jerusalem, that's the area that Paul covered throughout his missionary journeys. And in these different churches, he took up these offerings that were sent back to help the poor in the mother church of Jerusalem. Some churches gave very generously, other churches didn't give as much. And this is one of the ways that Paul, in the very early days of the Christian church, sought to bring together the church, all of these separate units that were spread throughout Asia Minor, by this system of shared ministry and mutual cooperation. As United Methodists, we are a part of a network with other United Methodist churches throughout Virginia and throughout the world. And we have what's known as apportionments, funds that we pay to support the ministries of our conference and throughout the world. This is something that is not a new practice, but in many ways is our version of what Paul did on his missionary journeys many years ago. Members of the Finance and Stewardship Committee, if you'll please stand and be recognized. Thank you all. For the Worship Committee, in Acts chapter 20, we recount how Sunday became to be the day that Christians set apart to worship God. We read in the scriptures how they got together in people's homes, as I mentioned earlier, and they prayed for one another. They sang hymns. They read from the scriptures of the Old Testament, and they read from the epistles of the apostles, and those writings that would go on to become our New Testament. In our church, we have a worship committee. They are the ones that sponsored this service today. And we meet throughout the year to look at our Sunday services and our special services, so that our scripture readers, our acolytes, our choir, the pastor, and all of the other members of the church can be involved in this vital life force here. If members of the worship committee will please stand. Thank you all. Helping Hands Ministry. In John's Gospel, we read how when Jesus stood at the tomb of his friend Lazarus, he wept and he cried. The scripture also mentions that there were other women who accompanied Mary at that time, and they mourned with her as well. Mourning is not something that people of faith were meant to do on their own. In our church, we have the Helping Hands Committee that gets together for a bereavement meal in the aftermath of the funeral, and also goes and takes food and other things to people's homes when we have ill people who are home-ridden. If members of Helping Hands will please stand to be recognized. Thank you all. To the Fellowship Committee. People's lives are transformed when they dine together. Throughout the Gospel, we hear stories about Jesus going into people's houses, like Zacchaeus, and how the conversations they have around the table become life-transforming experiences. Matthew 10 also recounts about Jesus sending the disciples out into pairs to go into people's homes and to share the gospel. And he says to them, you are to sit down at the table, and whatever food they offer you, you are to receive. Throughout the year, we have special fellowship meals after worship on Sunday and at other times with different themes. Our fellowship committee organizes the gathering of supplies for this, the food and the tablecloth and the silverware and so forth. Let's invite the fellowship committee to stand. Thank you. The Education of Children and Youth Committee and the Preschool Committee. Children play a valuable role throughout the Bible. The boy David, as he was caring for sheep and writing psalms, protected the sheep from wild animals that came. Later, he used those same skills he developed to slay Goliath, the Philistine giant, who was challenging and taunting God's people. We read in Mark's Gospel how a 12-year-old girl who was very near death was brought back to life and raised. According to Mark, that's the first miracle that Jesus carried out. And in John's Gospel, we read about a small boy who brought to Jesus some loaves and some fish, which he multiplied and used to serve the multitudes. Also in the Gospel, we read about how people brought their children to Jesus, and they sat upon his knee, and he offered them his blessing. The church continues to carry out this tradition by offering a blessing to children who are within our care. If members of the Children, Education, and Youth Committee and Preschool Committee can please stand. Thank you. The Outreach Committee and the Social Club. Jesus said in Matthew's Gospel in a parable, "As you have done it for the least of these, you have done it unto me." The Outreach Committee helps us to take this mandate and go out and serve our neighbor, whoever he or she may be, throughout various ministries and charities within the area. The Social Club invites into this space very special guests on the second Sunday of every month. And we dine with them, and we talk to them, and we get to know them. Keeping in mind what Jesus said to us, that as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. Whenever we sit at the table with Social Club members, and we talk to them, and we look into their face, whenever we serve meals at a food kitchen or a homeless shelter, and we look into the people's faces that we're serving, we are looking into the face of Christ our Lord. The Outreach Committee and the Social Club gives us the opportunity to have that experience. If members of these committees can please stand. Thank you. For our annual conference delegate, Peter and Paul provided letters of introduction to fellow Christians who couriered their letters to them, informing them who they are and how valuable they are in their ministry. It was another way, along with those common offerings, that Paul and Peter and others attempted to bring together the various parts of the ancient Christian church. As United Methodists and a part of a congregational connection, every year we have a meeting entitled the Annual Conference. This year and next year will be hosted here in Roanoke. And every year we send one of our own members to participate in that conference, to represent us for the larger church within Virginia, and to represent what we believe the vision is for the church coming ahead. That person is also someone who is on some of these other committees that we've mentioned here this morning. The idea is that what goes on in the conference connects to us here, and what we're doing here connects to our ministries in Virginia. This one is a solo. I invite Linda, our conference delegate, to stand. Thank you. For the Staff Parish Relations Committee, in the book of Acts, we read how certain elders were set apart for prayer and for scriptural study and for serving the congregation. From the very early days of the Christian church, certain people were set apart for full-time ministry, and they were financially supported by the congregations that they served. Our Staff Parish Relations Committee is the committee that deals with the pastor, but also lay people who work for the church in full, or in our case, in part-time ministries. If the members of the Staff Parish Relations Committee please stand. Thank you. Jesus said in John's Gospel, chapter 15, verse 5, "I am the vine and you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing." Good trees and good vegetation bears much fruit. And those of you who know a little bit about this, you know that through grafting, different kinds of fruit can be grown on the same vine or the same tree. One apple tree can grow different kinds of apples. One grapevine can grow different kinds of grapes. Each of us is called by God to use the strengths and talents we have in the ministry of the church and to be fruitful. It is the common vine that brings all of these different people and ministries together in the work of the Administrative Council. If Administrative Council members will please stand. Thank you. Finally, we have the Nominations and Lay Leadership Committee. Paul talked about the body of Christ being like the human body, where different parts of the body have different functions. You wouldn't expect an eye to do the work of an ear, or a hand to do the work of the foot. It is the job of the Nominations and Lay Leadership Committee, which is chaired by the pastor and filled with lay members from the church, to assign people to go on other committees, to make sure that people are paired up where their gifts and their passion will do the most good within the church. If members of Nominations and Lay Leadership would please stand. Thank you. Finally, all of these committees and work groups are representative. They work on very specific areas, but they represent the congregation at large. That means if you have thoughts or feelings about any of these particular work areas, then the people who are on these committees that stood this morning and listed on the list before you would like to hear from you. We do not accept anonymous feedback, because anonymous feedback causes more harm than good. But if you are willing to talk to a member of the committee and allow your name and ideas to be shared with the committee, that will be done. Or if you prefer, you can write them down and sign your name to them and have that presented. In the previous year, we've had examples of times that committees have met and taken the counsel given to us by fellow members, and it shaped the work that we have done. If you have not stood this morning, please talk to me, and I would be very interested in making sure that you find your place in that. Now, if you'll all give your word of your thanks to those who serve.